Listen to me. If everybody likes you, if nobody's talking about you, if nobody's hating on you, then guess what? You're not doing anything worth remembering. A man without enemies is a man without qualities. Because when you stand for something, when you chase your dream, when you break out of the box, somebody's not gonna like it. And that's the proof you're moving in the right direction. Comfort don't create champions, conflict does. And today I need you to stop worrying about who's against you and start focusing on the fact that their resistance is the greatest confirmation of your purpose. You know, there's this idea people carry around that the highest good in life is to be liked by everyone, to be agreeable, to avoid confrontation. And it sounds nice on the surface, because who doesn't want peace? Who doesn't want to get along with everybody? But if you analyze it more deeply, you realize that the pursuit of universal approval comes at a very steep price. It requires you to dilute yourself, to water down your beliefs, to never speak too loudly about what you truly think. In essence, you trade your authenticity for acceptance. And in that process, you give away the very qualities that make you unique. The truth is this: the moment you decide to stand for something, truly stand for it, you will create opposition. Not because you're malicious, not because you're trying to create enemies, but because reality itself is structured around difference and conflict. The second you say, this is right, someone else will say, no, that's wrong. And that tension, that resistance, is the natural outcome of living authentically. If you avoid that conflict, it doesn't mean you're good. It means you've chosen comfort over courage. Think about it, the individuals we admire most, people who shifted culture, challenged injustice, broke barriers, they all had enemies, they all faced resistance. Why? Because they stood tall when others bowed. They dared to embody qualities that disturbed the complacent. Their very existence was a challenge to mediocrity. And the same will be true for you. If you find that everyone is comfortable around you, if no one ever pushes back on your words or actions, it probably means you haven't stood firmly enough for anything of consequence. And that's the paradox. Enemies, in a strange way, are evidence of qualities, strength, conviction, authenticity. They reveal that you're alive in the deepest sense, not just drifting along with the current. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it hurts to be criticized. But the alternative is far worse: to live invisible, unnoticed, and untested. So the next time you face opposition, don't be so quick to interpret it as failure. Ask yourself instead, what am I doing that threatens the status quo? What truth am I carrying that others can't bear to confront? Because often that's exactly what's happening. And here's the closing thought. If you have no enemies, it's not a sign of peace. It's a sign you've compromised too much of yourself. When you encounter opposition in life, it's easy to fall into the trap of seeing it as an attack on your worth. Someone disagrees with you, someone resists your progress, and suddenly you start questioning yourself. Am I wrong? Am I not good enough? But if you step back and examine this more carefully, you realize that enemies don't usually show up when you're weak. They appear when you start to show strength. They don't attack insignificance because there's nothing to attack. They react to potential, to growth, to the emergence of qualities that unsettle the environment around them. Think about it. Nobody bothers with a person who blends in completely. No one wastes energy trying to bring down the individual who refuses to stand out. But the moment you move forward with conviction, the moment you start embodying discipline, ambition, courage, suddenly you become noticeable. And when you're noticeable, you become threatening to those who are comfortable in stagnation. That's why enemies are not simply a problem, they are evidence that something in you has become formidable. There's a psychological dimension to this as well. People project their insecurities onto others. If you begin to rise, it shines a light on the parts of their life they've neglected. Your discipline makes their laziness visible. Your courage highlights their fear. Your success exposes their excuses. And instead of confronting themselves, they often choose the easier route to attack the person who triggered that discomfort. That person is you. In other words, their opposition is less about you and more about what you represent. This is why you should learn to reinterpret enemies as signals, not setbacks. When resistance appears, it's often telling you that your life is beginning to carry weight. You're becoming someone who cannot be ignored. That's not a call to arrogance, it's a call to responsibility. If your strength unsettles others, then you have a duty to continue growing stronger, not to shrink back into the shadows. So here's the reflection to carry with you when enemies rise against you. Don't just ask, why are they against me? Ask instead, what quality in me have they recognized that I've barely begun to see in myself? Because often, your enemies recognize your strength before you do. One of the most dangerous illusions we fall into is the belief that life is supposed to be easy, that the absence of conflict is the sign of a good existence. But the reality is quite different. Comfort, for all its short-term appeal, erodes us over time. It softens the very qualities required to survive and thrive. If you spend too long in comfort, you become fragile psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. You lose the resilience that only emerges when you're tested by difficulty. And here's the paradox: it is precisely in conflict, in resistance, in the challenges that push you to the edge, that strength is forged. Just think about it biologically. A muscle only grows when it's placed under stress, when it's torn and forced to rebuild itself stronger. The mind and the character function the same way. Without challenge, they remain underdeveloped. With challenge, they gain depth, clarity, and fortitude. But we avoid conflict because it feels uncomfortable. We crave ease, and when ease is available, we slip into it almost automatically. The problem is that comfort doesn't ask anything of you. It doesn't demand growth. And over time, that lack of demand leaves you unprepared for the inevitable storms that life will deliver. You don't get to avoid those storms forever. They will come. The only question is whether you've built yourself into the kind of person who can withstand them. This is why resistance is not your enemy, it's your teacher. Every difficult conversation, every setback, every criticism you endure, it's shaping you, it's refining your ability to remain steady under pressure. It's building the discipline to keep moving forward when quitting would be easier. And once you grasp this truth, you start to welcome a certain amount of discomfort because you recognize what it's doing to you. It's preparing you to carry heavier loads, to step into responsibilities that once seemed overwhelming. So if life feels difficult right now, don't be so quick to wish it away. The difficulty may be precisely what's equipping you to handle the life you've been asking for. Remember, this comfort creates weakness, but conflict creates growth. And growth is always more valuable than ease. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that criticism is proof they've failed. We live in a culture that often treats disapproval as something to avoid at all costs. You post an idea and someone pushes back. Suddenly, you question whether the idea was worth sharing at all. But here's the thing, criticism is inevitable the moment you decide to pursue something meaningful. And more than that, it can serve as a compass. It shows you where the boundaries are, where the friction lies, where your growth is being tested. When people criticize you, it doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. Very often, it means you've touched on something that matters. You've disturbed the equilibrium. And disturbance is uncomfortable, not just for you, but for the people around you. It forces them to confront something they would rather leave unexamined. In that way, criticism is less about you as an individual and more about the truth you're pressing against. Now, of course, not all criticism is created equal. Some of it is noise born of jealousy or resentment, but some of it contains valuable information, pointing out blind spots you might not see yourself. The challenge is learning to distinguish between the two. That requires humility on one hand, the willingness to listen, to ask, is there something here I should learn? And resilience on the other, the refusal to let every negative word derail your mission. It's a balance, listen enough to refine, but stand firm enough to keep moving forward. And here's something important to remember. The absence of criticism is not a victory. In fact, it often means you played it too safe. If no one ever pushes back against you, it might be because you've never ventured far enough into the territory of risk and responsibility. Criticism, in this sense, is evidence that you're moving towards something significant. So instead of interpreting opposition as a curse, try viewing it as feedback. It may sting, but it also signals that you're on the path of consequence, not comfort. And that's exactly where you need to be if you want to build a life of substance. The closing thought is this: criticism is not the voice of failure. It is often the proof that you're pursuing something worth doing. The presence of enemies, of people who resist you, forces something out of you that comfort never could. They compel you to strengthen yourself. When someone doubts you, when they criticize, when they try to pull you down, it demands a response. And that response, if handled properly, becomes a catalyst for growth. In a very real sense, your enemies end up shaping you more than your supporters do. Think about it. Support feels good, but it doesn't demand much from you. Encouragement is affirming, but it rarely forces change. Resistance, on the other hand, pushes you to examine your flaws, sharpen your abilities, and increase your resilience. Every time someone opposes you, you're presented with a choice: retreat into bitterness or rise into strength. That choice, repeated over and over, forges character. Psychologically, this is essential. Human beings need friction to refine themselves. You don't develop courage by avoiding fear. You develop it by confronting fear. You don't build discipline by taking the easy route. You build it by enduring hardship. Enemies, in this sense, act as the fire that tests and tempers the steel of your character. They don't just reveal who you are, they pressure you into becoming more than you were. And there's something else. If everyone in your life agreed with you, you would never be forced to clarify what you believe. But when someone challenges you, when they say, you're wrong, you're forced to think more carefully. You must strengthen your arguments, refine your principles, and ensure that your convictions are not shallow. In this way, your enemies can paradoxically deepen your clarity of vision. It's uncomfortable. It always will be. But discomfort is not always a sign you're going the wrong way. Sometimes it's evidence that you're being stretched into the person you need to become. That's why, instead of shrinking when opposition comes, you should treat it as training. Training for bigger responsibilities, larger challenges, and higher levels of impact. So here's the reflection. Every time someone tries to bring you down, they're giving you a gift, though they don't intend it. They're forcing you to rise. And the person who learns to rise in the face of resistance becomes unstoppable. When you think about legacy, the mark you leave behind, it's never built on avoidance. History doesn't remember the people who played it safe, who avoided conflict, who never stirred the waters. It remembers those who are willing to endure resistance in order to stand for something meaningful. That's the uncomfortable truth. Greatness and opposition are inseparable. If you want to live a life without enemies, you can. All you have to do is never take a risk, never speak the truth too boldly, never challenge the prevailing narrative. Blend and keep your head down, agree with everyone, and eventually people won't resist you because they won't notice you. But that path also guarantees that your life becomes invisible, insignificant, and easily forgotten. Legacy is carved out of resistance. It's the opposition that tests whether your convictions are worth holding on to. It's the pushback that forces you to prove through your actions that what you believe is more than words. And when you endure that struggle long enough, people begin to see you differently. They see not just what you achieved, but what you were willing to withstand in order to achieve it. That endurance becomes part of your story, and stories are what live on long after we're gone. There's also a profound psychological reality here. Meaning in life isn't found in comfort, it's found in responsibility. And responsibility is always tied to conflict, because to take responsibility is to invite difficulty. When you decide to lead, to create, to push forward, you accept the inevitable truth that not everyone will come with you. Some will resist you simply because your movement disrupts their inertia. But that's the price of living a life that matters. So you have a choice: live unnoticed and unchallenged, or live with opposition and build a legacy. And the irony is, those who fear enemies the most are often the ones who never discover what they were capable of becoming. They die with their potential intact, untouched, untested. Here's the closing thought. Your legacy will not be measured by how many people liked you, but by how courageously you stood in the face of those who did. So when you leave here today, remember this: the measure of your life will not be how many people approved of you, but how many times you chose conviction over comfort, truth over silence, and growth over ease. Enemies are not the sign that you failed. They're the evidence that you've lived authentically, that you've dared to push against the weight of mediocrity. Let opposition sharpen you. Let criticism guide you. Let conflict strengthen you. And let resistance carve out the legacy you were meant to leave. Because in the end, it is better to be remembered for standing firm in the storm than forgotten for blending into the crowd.